Hey everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. Got a bit of a de-dollarization update for you today because the central banks of 9 Asian countries have just announced that they are dumping the US dollar and abandoning the SWIFT payment system. Now, this is just the latest blow against the reigning global reserve currency, the US dollar, in this death by 1,000 cut story of de-dollarization that we are watching play out before our very eyes. And when you see developments like this, it is hard to deny that de-dollarization is a very real phenomenon with very real implications for the purchasing power of the dollar, for its role as the world's reserve currency, and also for hard money assets like gold and silver. Buy your gold and silver from SD Bullion. Right now, new customers can get gold or silver at spot by visiting sdbullion.com/new. So here's the headline from Iran's IRNA, that's the Islamic Republic News Agency. Iran's SEPAM to replace SWIFT in trade transactions, ACU chief. Now, the ACU, that is the Asian Clearing Union. This is a group established back in 1974, and it is composed of the central banks of 9 Asian countries: Iran, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Maldives, Myanmar, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and India. Now, that is the biggest economy on the list, and keep in mind, that's also the world's most populous nation. So this is a fairly significant development. And in this piece of news, we learn that the Secretary General of the Asian Clearing Union says Iran's financial messaging system, SEPAM, will replace SWIFT, a dollar-based international system, in trade exchanges between ACU members beginning next month. Now, this transition to SEPAM is an interim plan. The ACU is not going to be permanently using SEPAM, and SEPAM is this alternative payment system that Iran has been forced basically to devise because they have been excluded from the SWIFT system by sanctions, along with Russia and Belarus, by the way. Those are the other countries that are currently blocked from using SWIFT. In addition to this SEPAM system, remember, it was also revealed earlier this year that Iran is working on a gold-backed stablecoin system for cross-border payments. That's a project that they're working on with the Russian central bank. However, the ACU is going to be working on developing their own system, but they'll be using SEPAM in the interim. They didn't want to continue using SWIFT in the meantime. And we heard earlier in May from the Central Bank of Iran Deputy Governor Mohsen Karimi through the Iranian state-owned Fars news agency that, quote, the ACU countries decided to have a customized system for themselves, considering that SWIFT is not available to all countries and given that it has its own costs. So they're going to develop their own payment system like SWIFT or SEPAM, but in the meantime, they are going to be using the Iranian system, and they are dumping SWIFT beginning next month. And all of this is just another sign of this multipolar global financial order that is on the rise. And this doesn't mean, of course, that the dollar is going away, but it does mean that the West's monopoly of the global financial system is coming to an end. And from this point forward, the West's grasp over how the rest of the world conducts its financial affairs will be getting steadily weaker. And this is hardly an isolated event. Just recall that back at the end of March, the ASEAN nations, that's the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, that's Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, they had a meeting in Indonesia where they decided to transition away from dollars, the euro, the yen, and the British pound for bilateral transactions. So they're dumping all of the G7 currencies in favor of using their own local currencies for those bilateral payments. And at that meeting, Indonesia was even calling for phasing out Visa and MasterCard. So again, this is just another example of the rejection of the Western monopoly on the financial system and the development of this multipolar system that is arising. And it's very important to grasp because in order to undermine global dollar hegemony, these rival countries, the BRICS nations, the global south, whatever you want to call them, they don't have to eliminate the dollar from the global scene. They just have to provide some kind of viable alternative. And as you can tell, they are busily working on several alternative systems. First, we saw Southeast Asia moving in this direction. Now we have these more centrally located Asian central banks also dumping the dollar in the SWIFT payment system entirely. And certainly, the dollar is still the global reserve currency. It's still the dominant currency around the world. But the thing is, it is losing market share. And as you can see from the pace of these developments, it is losing market share at a pretty good clip. And in just a little over a month now, we're going to have the BRICS nations holding their annual BRICS summit. We know that they too are going to have de-dollarization on the agenda with two very critical items. The first will be the development of a BRICS reserve currency, at least the intention of which is to rival the US dollar, and also the induction of Iran and Saudi Arabia into the BRICS organization. And that threatens to undermine the petrodollar system, which has been a linchpin of the dollar's global status for more than 5 decades. Now, I consider that second threat to the petrodollar to be the more credible here. There's a lot of controversy about whether the BRICS nations really will be able to assemble a viable alternative currency to the US dollar. I do think that there is some merit to those criticisms. The BRICS nations are more of a loose amalgamation of nations, an economic union of sorts, but they do have differing motives here. They have significantly different cultures and governments and all these things. So will they be able to put together a currency to rival the dollar? I'm not so sure about that. But, there's one very credible alternative to the US dollar as the global reserve, and that is one that humanity has defaulted back to time and time again, and that, of course, is the precious metals, gold and silver. So, even if the BRICS nations aren't able to come up with something to rival the dollar, there is a very clear alternative that we may end up turning to, and, that's evidenced in moves like that Iranian plan to develop a gold-backed stablecoin currency. But why are all of these countries so motivated to move away from the US dollar? Well, it's because we have made it in their best interest to do so. Central banks and governments around the world, they take the threat of sanctions very seriously, and they don't like the idea that if they don't toe the line for the US, or if, somehow they end up on the wrong side of one of these brewing global conflicts, they want to make sure that they have alternatives to systems like SWIFT and not be entirely dependent on the weaponized US dollar. And it's kind of ironic if you think about it that the very thing that makes the dollar a viable weapon, that is its unrivaled predominance in the global economy, is itself threatened by the weaponization of the dollar. And if you ask me, these sanctions, the economic warfare, the currency weaponization, it's all very short-sighted. And I do believe that within my lifetime at least, we will see the emergence of some form of credible alternative to the US dollar, and a multipolar world financial order will develop. I mean, the question really is, how long is that going to take? That's anybody's guess. It's kind of hard to tell. I don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you that the dollar, it has been a pure fiat currency for more than 5 decades now. Ever since Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility back in 1971. And to be honest, if you look at the historical record, 50 plus years, that's a pretty good run for a paper fiat currency that's backed up only by the full faith and credit of its respective government. And so, I think we all need to be getting ready for this major shakeup in the world economy. But what does that look like? How do we prepare? Well, just look at what central banks are doing. I mean, they are stacking gold. They're getting into hard assets, and they're reducing their exposure to the dollar. Earlier this month, we had analysts at JP Morgan sounding the alarm surrounding de-dollarization, and they pointed out that the dollar share of central bank forex reserves has declined to a record low of 58%, and also that gold's share of reserves has risen from 11% to 15% in just the past 5 years alone. So, for me, the plan is largely the same, but since I am not a central bank, I'm just kind of an average Joe trying to protect myself from these forces of global de-dollarization, and also because silver is just so cheap relative to gold at the moment, I'm stacking silver. That's what I'm doing to get prepared. I mean, right now, 1 ounce of gold will buy you 81 ounces of silver. That is the gold to silver ratio. And if you compare that to the mining ratio, the ratio at which these metals are pulled out of the ground of 10 to 1, or the historical ratio of 16 to 1, or even the average ratio through the 20th century, which was 47 to 1, I think it's pretty obvious that silver is just tremendously undervalued at today's price. And there are machinations at work which could drive the price, at least in dollar terms, much higher in the relatively near future. So, in addition to getting prepared mentally, physically, and logistically, I am stacking silver. Now, this is not financial advice. I'm not telling you what to do. Maybe that's not the right way to get prepared for you. I'm just sharing with all of you what I am doing. But I would love to hear from you. Let me know. What do you think about this growing de-dollarization trend? Where do you think the next shoe is going to drop? Or perhaps you think that, this whole thing is just an overblown threat, it's just fear-mongering, and that the fiat US dollar is going to stick around forever, or at least for the foreseeable future. Leave me a comment down below to let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, everybody. Stay safe and happy stacking, and I will catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker, out.